Fresh off the debacle of their Trump town hall, CNN on Sunday gave a forum to one of the other Republican candidates for president, ex-South Carolina governor and former Trump ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. So what did the only woman of color in the GOP field spend a lot of time talking about? Culture wars, of course.
Why is it that you have, kids undergoing critical race theory where if a little girl's in kindergarten, if she goes into kindergarten, if she's white, you're telling her she's bad. If she's brown or black, you're telling her she's never going to be good enough and she's always going to be a victim.
That's false, obviously. Not just the idea that critical race theory is being taught in elementary schools, but that it's all about leftist brainwashers shaming white elementary school kids for their skin color. That, of course, is a fever dream of knee-jerk conservatives desperate for a safe space from real American history. But it's standard operating procedure for Nikki Haley and every other GOP candidate. They realize that they have to say this dumb stuff just to be taken seriously by the Republican base. So much darned political correctness run amok. Just look to the other highly vaunted GOP challenger to Trump, perpetually aggrieved Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. His own supporters openly say the DeSantis campaign isn't about public policy, but channeling far-right anger. The fight for the soul of the party isn't about tax cuts or trade deals. Jeff Rowe, a top advisor to the super PAC supporting DeSantis, told Axios, "It is this cultural combat that we have as a country." He added, quote, "These people know that DeSantis is a culture warrior for this time." And in lieu of, governing, DeSantis has banned critical race theory, as well as AP African-American history and discussion of thorny political issues in the classroom, like whether gay, lesbian and transgender people exist. Pandering politicians like DeSantis have also emboldened campaigns to ban books and writers with critical perspectives. Writers like Ibram X. Kendi, who went from studying in Stonewall Jackson High School in Northern Virginia to being one of America's preeminent scholars on race and anti-racism and the winner of a MacArthur Genius Grant. Kendi's 2019 book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, was a bestseller and a prime target of far-right lawmakers and book-banning groups like Moms for Liberty. If you thought that book would corrupt America's youth, you're going to be very worried about his latest offering in graphic novel form. Titled Stamped from the Beginning, A Graphic History of Racist Ideas in America. It's a visual and dramatic adaptation of Kendi's groundbreaking 2016 work with the same title, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction. What does this graphic novel say about this moment in America? And what does the author have to say about being a target in the ongoing right-wing culture wars? Let's ask him. Joining me now is Ibram X. Kendi, author of the best-selling books How to Be an Anti-Racist and Stamped from the Beginning, which, as I say, is now available as a graphic novel. He's also founder and director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. Ibram, thanks for coming back on the show. As I mentioned, your books have faced bans in several school districts, including a failed attempt in Sarasota, Florida, this past February. So how long before people try and ban Stamped, the graphic novel, do you think?
It probably won't take long. Unfortunately, it's a deeply accessible book that I think young people, just like older people, will be able to learn about America's racist history, particularly its racist ideas. And so, unfortunately, those types of books are being banned.
And what is your response to this idea that Nikki Haley was getting at in her CNN town hall that's shared by many on the right, that teaching our history, the racist history, as you just mentioned, black history, is making white kids feel guilty about being white, that it somehow oppresses white children? A lot of ordinary Americans, conservative Americans, have really come to believe that.
It demonstrates that they not only don't understand U.S. history, they also don't understand white American history, because to teach about the history of racism is to not just teach about people of color who challenged those racist policies. It's also to teach about white abolitionists or white civil rights activists who challenged Jim Crow or slavery. And so a white student's going to be seeing those people who look like them challenging racism, just like they're going to see people who look like them upholding racism. And I don't think they're going to feel bad. If anything, they're going to connect, hopefully, with those people who challenged racism then and therefore will challenge it now. And I think that's what people like Nikki Haley and others are afraid of.
It's a very good point. Question for you. If you, Ibram X. Kendi, could wave a magic wand and create the perfect curriculum for kids in elementary school, what would you want the white kids to know about racism and segregation and hierarchy and our history of all of that? How much would you worry about them feeling guilty for our collective past, as conservatives claim?
Well, I would want them to learn about the fact that we've had these disparities and inequities and injustices over the course of history, just as we do today, not because there's something superior about white people or inferior about peoples of color. It's because of these bad policies. And I'd want them to really understand those bad rules. And I'd want them to also understand the racist ideas that cause us to not see those bad rules and instead see certain racial groups, as inferior, so that they can identify them, so that they don't internalize them, so that they can see everyone, so we can all see everyone as equals.
And Nikki Haley, of course, is running for president, as is Senator Tim Scott. They're both people of color who seem to be trying to walk this fine line between sharing their lived experiences with racism and also claiming that America is not a racist country. Have a listen to what Tim Scott said on The View just this week when he was asked about systemic racism.
One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today. Just change the stations and see how much progress has been made in this country. ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, CNN, Fox News all have African-American and Hispanic hosts. So what I'm suggesting is that yesterday's exception is today's rule.
What is your response to Tim Scott?
I think Tim Scott needs to take a course in African-American history. I think Tim Scott needs to take a Black Studies course. I think Tim Scott needs to understand what racism is. And when you understand the history of racism, you'll know that you can't measure progress by the efforts of individuals, like Black individuals who are now hosts or even presidents or vice presidents. We should be measuring progress based on whether we're reducing racial disparities. We should be measuring progress based on the majority of Black Americans, not a minority. And unfortunately, when we measure progress by single individuals, we ignore what a lot of African Americans are facing.
And the top two Republican presidential contenders are, of course, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And while Trump can be very overt, of course, with his racism and bigotry, saying, there were good people on both sides in Charlottesville, calling Mexicans rapists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ron DeSantis is less overt in his language, but he's used policies, legislation to go after Black voters, Black history, immigrants, queer and trans folks, and others. In your mind, I wonder, who is more dangerous for minority communities, a Trump or a DeSantis?
So I would probably say a DeSantis, and I would say DeSantis because people, if they do not understand and recognize the perniciousness of the racist policies that he is putting forth, and they assume he's quote unquote less racist than Trump, then we're not going to have our guard up. We're not going to be organizing as fiercely, against him. And so to me, I would say DeSantis, because when you look at the policies that they're both putting forth, they're relatively similar. If anything, you can make a case that DeSantis's policies are in certain ways harsher.
And talking of those harsher policies, he's gone after higher education. He's hired people like the conservative activist Christopher Rufo, who has talked about laying siege to higher education programs, diversity and inclusion programs. He's even been very critical of your work, Rufo, writing a whole op-ed about you in the New York Post in the summer of 2021. He called you a false prophet and talked about your religion of anti-racism is nothing more than a marketing-friendly recapitulation of the academic left's most pernicious ideas. When you see what DeSantis and Rufo and what they're doing with higher education, what do you make of all
that? What I make of it is that in many ways they're trying to bring their own propaganda to higher education. They want higher education to engage not in a critical analysis of power, a critical analysis of history, of society, of injustice and inequity, but they want a higher education that's going to indoctrinate people to not be critical, to accept their own domination. And those of us who are trying to nurture that criticality, of course, they're challenging us, you know, as the problem, so that they can present themselves as the solution.
And just on your book, there are already several versions of Stamped. The original version, there's one for kids, there's the remix. Why now a graphic novel? What does that medium do that the other versions of Stamped don't?
Well, this history that I've written about and partnered with others on the history of anti-Black racist ideas, this is a heavy history. And it is difficult for people to digest some of these horrific things that have been said about Black people. And so I thought the medium of the graphic novel, particularly working with Joel Christian Gill, who is not only a brilliant cartoonist, but is damn near funny, could allow humor to allow people to understand and digest and get through and even appreciate and learn from this history.
One last question. Some breaking Supreme Court news today. The justices voted 5-4 to strike down Alabama's congressional map, affirming a lower court's decision that the map likely violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting the power of Black voters. Chief Justice John Roberts and Trump-appointed Justice Brett Kavanaugh both sided with the liberals on the court. Are you surprised to see the Supreme Court defending the Voting Rights Act, defending Black voters?
Oh, yes. I mean, this is the first time I can remember them defending the Voting Rights Act in a while. And I think many of us feared that this case could lead to the Voting Rights Act being further diluted, which of course would have been a catastrophe, because the Voting Rights Act is quite possibly the most anti-racist bill ever passed, you know, by the U.S. Congress. And so the fact that it lived another day is certainly a surprise, you know, to me, but a pleasant surprise.
It is indeed. We will have to leave it there. Ibram X. Kendi, thank you so much for your time. The book is called Stamped from the Beginning, A Graphic History of Racist Ideas in America.